Hello and welcome. You are listening to an informed take on current events brought to you by law students and staff of Queen's University Belfast. This is LawPod.
Hello, my name is Jay Burbank and welcome to this episode of the LawPod. Today I'm joined by lecturer Clare Patton, who focuses on cause-related marketing in CSR. Hi, Clare.
Hi, Jay. Thanks for having me.
So, Clare, your specific area of research, cause-related marketing, would you like to wind back the clock for us and maybe talk about sort of the broader context of what maybe CSR is and what cause-related marketing is specifically?
Okay, thanks, Jay. So with corporate social responsibility, that is when a corporation want to be seen to do good in their community. That can be at a local level or a global level, and there are lots of different ways that a corporation can do that. So they may get involved with some sort of wildlife protection scheme. They may decide to go green to save energy. They may decide to get involved with a humanitarian crisis, or they may decide to get involved with a cause. And that's my area of research, so it's cause-related marketing. So the cause in cause-related marketing is the actual cause that the corporation want to raise awareness of and raise funds for. How this normally works is that a non-profit organisation will partner up with a for-profit organisation, and then they work together to raise awareness of and funds for a particular cause. So this can be something like diabetes, or it could be heart issues. It can be to raise awareness of global warming. So it can be any cause that would capture the imagination of the stakeholders involved for the company. So the particular issues that I'm interested in is breast cancer, that I researched for my PhD, and also I've moved on to looking at breastfeeding, so breast milk substitution, cause-related marketing as well.
And these corporations that are partnering with non-profits in cause-related issues, do you find that they will adapt their campaign based on cultural sensitivities if it's international and cross-jurisdictional?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, Jay. So with my research, what I found is that whenever we look at what corporations would have been interested in years ago and how corporations acted before we had the internet, essentially, and before the world became a much smaller place and globalization and so on, that corporations could tailor how they acted with their stakeholders and how they presented the corporate image. They could tailor that in each jurisdiction, and they could sort of localize that. So, for example, if a corporation have an operation in the Middle East, then they can tailor their image, if you like, to be maybe more socially conservative. That same corporation can then tailor their image in more liberal countries to be more forward-thinking, maybe whenever we're looking at women's rights, etc. Whereas with globalization and the advancement of IT technology, corporations can't do that to the same degree. So, for example, two companies that fell victim to that are Starbucks and IKEA. So both would be seen in many countries, especially in the global north, as being progressive liberal companies who would advocate women's rights, etc. But both companies in Saudi Arabia, with Starbucks, they had a sign up that said that no women were allowed. I think the backstory to that was that women and men were normally segregated within the cafe, and that this dividing wall had somehow come down, and so they had put up a sign then that said that no women were allowed into the cafe because they couldn't segregate them. Now, whenever Twitter found out about this, a hashtag began trending, and this was very damaging to Starbucks brand. And then also with IKEA, again, a very liberal, forward-thinking company, and actually on their website, within their corporate social responsibility pages, they have a section dedicated to their work on the advancement of women's education in developing economies. And I think it was one of IKEA's subsidiaries had actually airbrushed out women in all of the catalogues. So for a start, it just looked very odd because it was just all men and boys in a homeware catalogue. So in the Western versions of these catalogues, there would be a mum, a dad and a child brushing their teeth. But in this version of it, the mum was airbrushed out, so it was just the father and son. But anyway, so they had done this. And again, whenever social media found out about this, it began trending and IKEA had to come out and apologise and explain why they had done this. So these examples are quite important because they show that there is no hiding place for corporations. So the type of corporation that I'm interested in researching is multinational corporations, MNCs. So these are companies that have operations throughout the globe. So these companies, whenever they get involved in a cause-related marketing campaign, they have to be very aware of what will translate and how this is going to translate across not just geographical borders, but political borders, social borders and cultural borders.
So these watchful consumers that are taken to Twitter and these instances of sort of outrage when actions are committed by these MNCs in another jurisdiction that they wouldn't perhaps commit in a more liberal Western jurisdiction. Do you see, and specifically in your research, you've written on the Think Pink campaign, do you see that as an example where perhaps these watchful consumers haven't been as in tune with what's been going on? And obviously that could lead into more discussion about what the Think Pink campaign is and what you wrote on it. Yeah,
that's another really interesting point, actually. So with my research, I look at breast cancer cause-related marketing, or that is what I did for my PhD. So I looked at 4 corporations. I looked at Asda, Avon, Debenhams and M&S. So these are all UK-based companies, but they're all multinational corporations. So I looked at their campaigns in the United Kingdom, the breast cancer cause-related marketing campaigns that they have in the United Kingdom. So whenever you're talking about watchful consumers, it is really interesting. And I wouldn't say that consumers generally have not copped to what's happened with the Pink Ribbon campaign. They have, but I think that the Pink Ribbon campaign has become so embedded in our culture that people accept it without really thinking about what goes on behind it. But in the last sort of 5 to 10 years, there's been quite a large movement against the corporatisation of breast cancer. And so now there's a tension between the two. And without maybe wanting to skip too far ahead with everything, I suppose in relation to my research, I do think that the breast cancer cause-related marketing, the Pink Ribbon, and everything surrounding that has started to lose its appeal and has started to lose its popularity, and it is due to social media and people communicating and realising that the corporate motive maybe isn't always as altruistic as what might first appear upon first blush.
Why do you think there hasn't been that same sort of, fast backlash, with a Twitter hashtag that has sort of exploded overnight as there would be with issues like in Saudi Arabia, women being segregated? And do you think it's more of a difficult issue in the West? Like, is it a difficult issue within our culture that we can't reconcile these two competing forces? One, the market, promoting a campaign and obviously benefiting from it with the profit incentive, and on the other hand, the wish and need to be altruistic and to support these non-profit campaigns. Like, what is it about our culture that can't reconcile these two being put together in the Think Pink campaign?
Well, I think with breast cancer, the reason that there hasn't been an explosion or a backlash is because the heavy lifting of the campaign was done during the 70s and the 80s, long before we had the internet. then originally breast cancer was something that women didn't talk about. Women were diagnosed with breast cancer, they lived through breast cancer, and they died through breast cancer, or they died of breast cancer without ever telling most of their family and their friends exactly what was wrong with them. They had some sort of unspoken female disease. Certainly up until the 70s, that would have been the case. And then there was, I suppose it was second wave feminism that really pushed women to start talking about breast cancer. And they started demonstrating in the streets, and they started demanding proper health care. And there was a woman called Charlotte Haley in the 1990s, and she came up with the idea of a little salmon-coloured ribbon, and she attached this to a card, and she had written on it, she had detailed on it the funds that were allocated to cancer research, and she started giving these out to her family and friends to raise awareness of breast cancer. Now, Estee Lauder, the cosmetics company, and Self magazine, around the same time, they started to have a look at this breast cancer cause, if you like, and they started to have a think about this and thought, you know what, this would fit quite well with our brand. It's a female-driven cause. Our consumers, our readers are female. So they approached Haley about using her ribbon, and she was obviously a very wise and insightful woman, because she could see, even though cause-related marketing would have been in its infancy back then, she could see that if she gave up her ribbon, that the point, the objective, could get lost within the whole corporatisation of the ribbon. And so she refused, and she said no, that she didn't want her ribbon to be used. So Estee Lauder and Self magazine went away and had a think, and they had a chat, and they spoke to their lawyers, and they realised that all they had to do was change the colour of the ribbon, and they could use it, because obviously the ribbon isn't copyrighted. And so they changed it to pink. And then I suppose you could say that the rest is history. So in the 90s, this cosmetics company and this women's magazine sort of gave birth to the breast cancer movement. And then you have a charity called Susan G. Komen in America, and they came along, and then they really lifted it to sort of superstar cult level, the breast cancer movement. So to answer your question about why there hasn't been this explosion or a backlash against breast cancer, it's because breast cancer cause-related marketing grew up in the 1990s, before we had the power of social media and before we had the power of Twitter. And it became so popular and so ingrained in our culture that most people don't think about it whenever they see this little obligatory pink ribbon, and they see it all over goods and products, especially around October, whenever that's Breast Cancer Awareness Month. I know that whenever I started my PhD and I started researching into this, maybe a few years before that, I had a little pin on my bag, little pink ribbon pin on my bag, and most of my family and friends did. It was just something that we just honestly, genuinely never really thought about. There's a group based in San Francisco called Breast Cancer Action, and they push back very, very strongly against the corporatisation of breast cancer. And there are lots of individuals, there are lots of blogs, there's lots of literature out there that pushes back against breast cancer. But breast cancer cause-related marketing has grown into an industry of its own, a very powerful and a very wealthy one. So it's very difficult to take it on. For example, the pink ribbon itself, I would argue, has become a logo that is as recognisable as the McDonald's arches or the Nike swoosh. So it's become a symbol that is very recognisable in our society and in our culture. So it's very difficult to tackle that and take that on.
And I suppose this is more of a difficult point morally, I suppose, but that brand recognition of the pink ribbon and that association with other corporate brands, is that inherently a bad thing? Or can you see any positives with it being this instantly recognizable brand for the charities that maybe affiliate themselves with it, either officially or unofficially?
So are you asking me, do I have a problem with pink ribbon from the charity side, or a problem with the pink ribbon from...
Do you have a problem with the sort of, I suppose, from a CSR context, the mutual benefit and the mutual gain, perhaps, of, yes, companies profiting, but at the same time, a lot of money being raised for charitable causes? Yeah,
I think, well, you're right when you say a lot of money is raised. Where the money goes and what good the money does is where I have a bit of an issue whenever, from carrying out the research. So I suppose there are a couple of things to think about. First off, breast cancer cause-related marketing. So we've got breast cancer in the title of that. So whenever we're looking at breast cancer cause-related marketing, we need to remember that these are real women who've been diagnosed with a disease that at best is going to be really horrific for a year, 18 months, maybe 2 years, while they undergo chemotherapy, radiotherapy, maybe an operation, etc., to try to recover from this. Sort of sitting in the middle ground is where a woman is facing losing maybe one breast or both of her breasts, and facing the dilemma as to whether or not she has reconstructive surgery, etc. And there are lots of offshoots of problems with that as well, and not just from the cosmetic side of it, but also if you've got a young woman, she's not going to be able to breastfeed. So you've got lots of other issues that come from that. And then of course we've got the worst outcome of all, which is when a woman will develop stage 4 breast cancer and she's ultimately going to die from the disease. So I think that's where we always need to sort of circle the conversation back and remember that we're talking about real women who are suffering from a disease that may ultimately take their lives. And if it doesn't take their lives, it could certainly maim them. I believe, through my research, that corporations have taken over. So there's been a corporate takeover of the disease of breast cancer. So the loudest voice in the breast cancer narrative no longer belongs to women with breast cancer. The loudest voice in the breast cancer narrative now belongs to the corporations. And what they have been able to do is they have been able to shape the social role of women with breast cancer because of the power that they now have within the breast cancer narrative. And that's where my issue is. And then there are lots of other things that we can have a think about where exactly the money goes. If there are so many billions of dollars raised, why are we no closer to a cure? Yeah. Why are breast cancer
and to take it back to your research, that's what I was going to lead into. So you talked about the narrative being shaped by corporations of breast cancer. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that means for breast cancer?
Yeah, so in my research, I mined the corporate websites of 4 corporations who engage with breast cancer cause-related marketing campaigns in the UK. So that is Asda, Avon, Debenhams and M&S. And what came out of that is a very specific typology of the ideal woman with breast cancer. So this woman will be heteronormative leaning, so that would be a heterosexual woman. She will be a mother or a grandmother in a nuclear family. She will be very positive in her outlook, and with positive, the consequences of that is that she will never kind of question her diagnosis, or rarely question her diagnosis, or even sort of say, well, why me? And the consequences that can follow on from that are that she is much less likely, and research has backed this up, she's much less likely to question doctors about her treatment, etc. as well. And so there's a quietening of that whole conversation around breast cancer rates and why is breast cancer diagnoses continuing to rise, and why is it that young women who get breast cancer are more likely to get an aggressive form of breast cancer, etc. And then another typology that comes through is this infantile behaviour. So, for example, whenever we look at breast cancer cause-related marketing campaigns, particularly from those companies that would be quite heavily involved in the US market, we can see that that it is very infantile in its approach. So, if you look at the Tickled Pink campaign run by Asda, I mean, even the name of that, Tickled Pink, sounds like a childhood game. So, we've got this Tickled Pink campaign, and these the fundraising activities will happen in store in the Asda stores, and it's feather boas and games of pass the parcel and cake bake sales, and it's almost a carnival atmosphere. And as part of my research, it was just a very, very small thing that I did, but I googled little girl's birthday party, and I googled the Tickled Pink Asda's Tickled Pink campaign, and the images were so similar. You're looking at a table in Asda that's got pink balloons and feather boas, and everybody's laughing and playing games, and you've got cakes and everything. But then you look at the little girl's birthday party, and they're very, very similar images. And by infantilizing women with breast cancer, you're downplaying the seriousness of their illness. So back to earlier, whenever I was talking about the actual lived experience of a woman with breast cancer, and she's facing horrific treatment ahead. She's facing losing a breast or both breasts, or potentially dying from this disease. If the narrative that the corporations are building is that we're going to be positive, we're going to beat this, then it's putting an awful pressure on women with breast cancer to behave in a certain way. And so in my research, I call this the social role, the breast cancer social role. And it's an expectation that I suppose generally we as a society place on women with breast cancer. And that expectation isn't placed on people with other diseases. So a little thing that you can do is go into Google and Google lung cancer or liver cancer or any of those other, prostate cancer. And then if you Google breast cancer, you see the difference that will come up. You'll see lots of almost fluffy images that come up for breast cancer, and that trivializes the disease relative to other diseases. And so that's what I mean about there's been this corporate takeover of breast cancer, and then the trivialization of the disease itself.
Do you think that's basically them sanitizing the disease and making it almost consumable to a particular market?
Absolutely, you've hit the nail on the head. Death does not sell. We don't want to walk into Asda and think about people dying. So, of course, we've got to have this very optimistic and very positive narrative built around it. So, for example, the year that I was doing my research and I was mining the data on M&S's website for their breast cancer campaign, they had 7 women giving their personal accounts of their breast cancer experience. And out of the 7 women, only one of those women had a terminal form of breast cancer. But she didn't speak about dying in her blurb. And it was all very positive. And her name was Mandy, and she was 26 whenever she gave the interview. And she spoke about, the silver lining of getting this disease is that I now appreciate life, etc., etc. And that always stuck with me because, there was no sadness or feeling sorry or anything. And that's okay because this whenever Mandy was giving the interview, she has the right to own her own experience. Of course she does. But whenever Marks and Spencer are doing these interviews for these women, it's a little bit like what we're doing right here now. You're setting up a question and I'm answering it. And so if these questions are set up in a certain way, then you only have, a certain way to respond to them. And then obviously Marks and Spencer can go away and edit and snip and frame this conversation and present it in a certain way. And so as a woman who's been diagnosed with breast cancer, if she goes on to Google and she is searching, say, for example, for post-mastectomy underwear, and she is brought to Marks and Spencer's website, and then she sees this on their website and she sees these 7 women, And these 7 women are all very optimistic and positive about their diagnosis. This is reinforcing the message that this is how this woman is supposed to act as well. So it becomes internalized. So she is thinking, well, everybody else is dealing so well with their diagnosis. What's wrong with me? I need to be positive, and I need to say, well, the good thing that's come out of this breast cancer is that I now really appreciate everybody in my life. And that's not fair, because it's not an expectation that we place on other people, on other individuals with other cancers.
Obviously, we've already discussed that there are certain levels of consumer accountability, perhaps in other CSR campaigns, and even in the Think Pink campaign with its decreasing popularity. And obviously, because it was a legacy of the pre-internet era, there hasn't been that accountability. But just on, and obviously I don't want to take too far from the topic, but just on government and what the public sector are doing to hold these corporations to account if perhaps money raised isn't being used appropriately, or if there is sort of this hijacking, if you like, by corporations. What is there anything you'd like to say on that, or just sort of broadly about what in particular Western governments are doing on that?
So with cause-related marketing there, and CSR more generally, there's always a tension between regulation and a sort of a free movement, or flexibility or a freedom for corporations to be able to get involved in campaigns without restricting them too much. Because the argument against over-regulation in this area is that if you over-regulate, then corporations will simply find a different way to get involved. They'll say, look, this has become too difficult for us, so we're just going to move on and find something else. And then you're left with charities maybe losing one of their big sponsors, their big partners. The other problem then is if you under-regulate it, you leave the non-profit organisations in a weaker or a more vulnerable position whenever they're trying to negotiate. So where I am sort of going with my current research, and don't probe me too much on this because it is work in progress, but where I'm going at the minute is a middle ground. So it's not really hard law, although there are some aspects within the Charity Act 1992 that we could look at maybe tightening up with corporate partnerships or commercial partnerships. But where I am going with the paper that I'm writing at the minute is more soft law regulation. So it's about tightening up the there is already a fundraising regulation. So there's the fundraising regulator website, and within that there is a code of conduct that corporations are supposed to adhere to. But where I want to go is to tighten up on that. And so one of the issues that I'm really interested in, and where I've sort of, I wouldn't say moved on from breast cancer, but I've maybe broadened my scope a little to bring breastfeeding into it, is I'm quite interested in corporations where there is a tension between their cause-related marketing campaigns and their actual activities. So if we look at a company like Nestle, who manufacture breast milk substitutes, so formula, and they push that quite heavily in developing economies like the Philippines, and that can lead to women not breastfeeding their babies, and then there's obviously a whole host of problems that's attached to that. But then you look on Nestle's website, and they actually have written on their website helping 50 million children to lead healthier lives, and you're sort of going, no, you're not actually. You're contributing to infant mortality in developing economies. So where I'm stuck at the minute with my research is I want to stop that tension. So I want to sort of say, okay, you company can't get involved in this cause-related marketing campaign if it conflicts with the actual activity that your company is doing. So again, going back to the breast cancer, if you're a cosmetics company and you use carcinogenic materials in your cosmetics, so you're over here on one hand using your carcinogenic material, then you can't pop up on the other hand and say, you know, we're working towards eradicating breast cancer, because you could be one of the causes of breast cancer. So this is what I'm figuring out in the early hours of the morning whenever I'm sitting typing and tapping away, is where we relieve that tension between where corporations are using their cause-related marketing campaigns to mask activities that sort of go on behind the scenes and maybe close that legitimacy gap.
And do you think there is sort of a taboo, at least in the Western democracies, against the very idea of regulating a charity or a charitable cause, or a cause which on the face of it is charitable, but if you dig a little deeper, is part of a broader cause-related campaign which is causing corporations to profit? Do you think there's a sort of a moral struggle going on there? You said yourself that you're looking more at soft law, soft law regulation, perhaps from a practical perspective of you don't want these corporations to just stop doing it altogether, obviously. But do you think also there are cultural reasons, perhaps moral reasons, why Western democracies wouldn't accept anything more than that?
I don't think that there's so much a moral dilemma whenever it comes to imposing hard law regulation on corporate charity partnerships. I think that there could be an issue in enforcing hard law regulation, and so that's why we prefer to look at soft law regulation. If you've got hard law regulation, then really punitively you're looking at fines. And you're saying, well, what good is there in fining a corporation, and certainly what good is there in fining a charity if they've in some way overstepped or gone outside of the regulation? And then you're looking at the practical side of it, of actually policing the hard law regulation. I think with everything, maybe it's looking at the context of specific situations. Certainly with cause-related marketing campaigns like breast cancer, I would not be an advocate of hard law regulation there. My breastfeeding research is in its infancy, but at this stage I would say that would be an area where I would look at imposing hard law regulation. So you say to a company like Heinz Kraft, or you say to a company like Nestle or Danone, you know what, if you go into a developing economy and you are essentially bribing healthcare workers to hand out literature which is making these women think that if they buy your formula, that their children are going to be more intelligent and therefore be able to lift themselves out of poverty, and you're pushing this and you're making this woman take this formula. So to rewind back a little bit, this woman will go into hospital to have her baby, and the midwives will be giving this literature out that advocates this particular formula that, you know, it looks very medical and scientific, and if you feed the baby using this formula, they're going to be very intelligent and, you know, maybe very athletic, etc., etc. And scientific studies show X, Y, Z. And then whenever they go into hospital, they're given a couple of big fat tins of formula that they can take home and feed their baby. And so these women go back, you know, oftentimes to essentially tin shacks, and they've got their 2 cans of formula and they make up the formula for the baby. Now, meanwhile, from a biological point of view, their breast milk is drying up. So they're making the formula milk for the baby. But then as time goes on, this free formula runs out. And then they realise that they can't afford to buy the formula. So, for example, in the Save the Children report called Don't Push It, there was a particular case study. So, say, for example, a woman in the Philippines. And for her to continue to buy that formula, it would have cost her 2/3 of her monthly income. Now, she can't afford to pay 2/3 of her monthly income on formula for her baby. So what does she do? She and her breast milk has now dried up. She has to feed her baby somehow. So she starts to dilute the formula down and weaken the formula. She's also living in a tin shack with no electricity, so she can't sterilise the bottles. She doesn't have access to the sterilisation equipment that we would be used to here. So now this baby is suffering a double hit because it's getting weakened and watered formula, and it's also getting it in not sterile bottles. So this baby is going to become sick, and potentially this baby could die. Now, you have this action by these companies, and it's not just one company, it's all 6 of the main formula companies. This is their action. This is how they're acting on the ground in these countries. But then on their shiny, glossy websites that we are reading, they're talking about how they're saving children and they're going to make the world a better place. And so where I would come in and say, this is where hard law regulation has a place. Because if you do that, if we find that that you are doing this, if we have proof of that, then we don't want to just say, naughty Nestle, you're not sticking to the goddamn code again. You've broken the code again. You want to bring in much, much higher sanctions. So I think that that is a place where hard law regulation can come in. However, policing that at a global level doesn't come without
yes, because obviously we're talking about multinational corporations, and that was going to lead me on to another question specifically on that, of whether the impetus is on us in the more developed world to impose these sanctions on the corporations, who obviously most of which would sit in the more developed world. Their office and their bureaucratic structures would be in the more developed world, and there'll be financial reporting in the more developed world as well. Yep. Or is the impetus on the developing world and that side of it, perhaps their governments coming together on the international stage, or who needs to push that effort to rein those corporations in?
Everybody. To be fair, there is a lot. It's too complex an issue to say that there's nothing out there. There are lots of different, there are hard law regulations in most countries governing the sale of breast milk substitute formula. It's about how do we actually police this, govern it, and make it work. I think everybody has a role to play whenever it comes to actually enforcing the laws here. I think that the developing economies obviously need to make sure that they are putting into practice the actual regulation that most of them have. For example, the Philippines, they do have regulation there governing the marketing and sale of breast milk formula. So I think that everybody has a role to play in terms of enforcing that. But to sidestep a little bit away from what you're talking about in terms of who polices it, and to sort of bring it back to my area of research, which is cause-related marketing, that's sort of the road that I'm at the minute, where I'm saying that we know that there is regulation out there. We know that the companies aren't adhering to it. So that's one area where we need to look and go, how do we make them keep to this and stick to this? But also, what if we look at it through a slightly different lens or take a slightly different approach? And that's exactly what I'm looking at the minute, where I'm saying, which I had brought up a few moments ago, where I'm saying that if a corporation, if their activities sit in contrast or conflict with any of their corporate social responsibility causes, then we just don't allow them to get involved anymore. So if you've got an MNC who is engaging in activity which sits in conflict with, say, for example, their cause-related marketing campaign, then we ban them from that. So we say Nestle, for example, I'm going after Nestle again, We don't buy Kit Kats in our house. But if we look at Nestle, you say, right, you know what, we're going to strip down this website that you have here. We're not going to allow you to say on your website that you're going to help lead 50 million children, or you're going to help 50 million children lead healthier lives. We're not going to allow you to do that, because we know that your activity at another level is not complementary of this statement. And so that's where I'm going at the minute. Now, as I say, this research is kind of in its infancy, so I don't know exactly how we would police and monitor that, but that's where I'm going, that I want to stop that tension with MNCs. I want to stop them being able to act in one way with us in our more privileged countries, and then act in a very different way whenever they're entering markets in less privileged areas.
And do you think any part of that is a problem with the modern production line in globalised companies, that perhaps this formula milk is being produced in the countries that it's pushing on those women in, say, those less developed countries? So, for instance, it's being produced there and now being marketed there, where traditionally it was being marketed here. So the whole paradigm has shifted, and essentially where the West is now full of service workers and the people working in the offices of these large companies who aren't seeing at all what's going on in these less developed countries in terms of production, and even now in terms of the market and the consumption of these goods.
Well, Jay, where do you think is one of the biggest producers of infant formula?
No idea.
The Republic of Ireland.
Oh.
So it's not to say that developing economies are the ones producing this. We've got a very, very developed economy producing it and shipping it out to these countries. In fact, there was somebody posted, and it came up on my social media feed, that wasn't great, because I think it was Monaghan was getting a factory that was going to produce even more formula, and there were like 70 jobs or something that was going to come. So kind of ironically, we are producing it, but we're then shipping it out. Now, we're producing it, but our laws are very tightly monitored in terms of infant formula. Our laws are very tightly monitored here. So the Republic of Ireland are very, very, very good at producing this milk. They're also pretty good at consuming it, because the Republic of Ireland have relatively low breastfeeding figures. But they're working to change that, as is the UK. So even though the Republic of Ireland are big on producing this infant formula, they're moving very swiftly and strongly into not allowing. So, for example, whenever as a woman you go into a hospital in the Republic of Ireland, a midwife isn't allowed to offer you formula, and some hospitals are moving very breastfeeding friendly, where the hospital don't give new mothers formula at all. So if you want to formula feed your baby, you have to bring your own formula in. So it's a really, really interesting point that you said there, and I wouldn't expect you to know who produces infant formula, but so it's a really, really interesing point that you made. But
it's quite fascinating, because obviously the traditional picture would be that the exploitation happens at the production end of the production chain, if you like, and the consumer end is traditionally viewed as these Western wealthier countries, where consumers are given this sanitized image of how their product got to them. But essentially you're saying that the production end's not exploitative at all, because it's happening in developed countries, but it's the consumer end that the exploitation is occurring on, not in maybe the developed countries, but definitely in the instance there you said about the Philippines, that there is exploitation happening to actual consumers, and that it's being allowed to happen there, but essentially not happening here.
No, not to the same degree. I mean, it does happen here. The next time that you're watching TV and you'll see an ad where you've got a baby and it's got lovely piano music in the background, and this cute little baby's crawling up a sofa, I think, and then they're crawling up a mountain, and it's, it shows the baby feeding at the breast, but then at 6 months, it's to move on from the breast, and it's to move on to this follow-on milk. And the reason that we have these ads is because in the UK and in the Republic of Ireland, they're not allowed to promote the sale of newborn infant formula. They can only sell it, they can only advertise it from aged 6 months on. And so this is why so many women think that at 6 months they need to stop breastfeeding. It's like, geez, I need to get the child weaned and get them onto this follow-on milk, because they see it advertised on TV. So there's still exploitation there, because there's no reason to wean your child at 6 months. So there's still exploitation there. It's just not to the same degree as we have it in countries where it's maybe not monitored or not regulated just as tightly.
And we talked obviously about Twitter policing and social media campaigns to raise awareness about these issues that are popping up. What can our listeners do, to in some way help or lead some kind of impact in this, and particularly this sort of exploitation of women? What could our listeners do?
Okay. Yes. The reason that I was laughing there is just reminding myself that I'm a corporate lawyer, and I need to just check that I'm not going to get sued by Nestle for some of my comments today. But I'm factually correct in everything I'm saying. But yeah, so whenever you're saying what can our listeners do, I'm just reining myself in there a little bit. So what can your listeners do? I suppose be more savvy and be more aware whenever you are buying produce and you're buying products and you see a little pink ribbon, or indeed a ribbon of any colour or any sort of emblem. Have a look and see exactly what the corporation are giving here. So if they say we're donating £1 for every, can of beans that you buy, we're going to donate, well, £1 is a lot, we're going to donate 10p for every can of beans that you buy. Have a look at the small print. And is that topped at £1,000? Because if it's topped at £1,000, that means that once that quota is reached, you're buying this particular can of beans because you think that you're giving 10p to save koala bears or something. Maybe not koala bears, they're probably not at risk. But you're going to support some cause. But you need to have a look and see exactly what that limit is and call them out. Companies don't like to be publicly shamed. So if you see this, then, fire off a tweet and say, hey, I don't want to go back to Nestle, say, hey, Tesco or Heinz or whoever, how much are you giving? Or, check them out, check it out publicly. Just so be aware and be savvy whenever it comes to cause-related marketing campaigns. If it's a good campaign, then yes, support it, because there are some excellent campaigns out there. With the infant milk, that's, I suppose, a different ballgame maybe, and that's something that needs to be taken really seriously. So we need to be aware with the companies who produce and sell infant milk products. We need to be more aware of their activity and push for better regulation. Just be aware of the products that they sell.
All right, thank you very much, Clare Patton, for joining me today.
Thanks, Jay.
And thank you very much all for listening. And if you'd like to find out anything more about Clare's research or about the topic more generally, you can check out the show notes. You have been listening to LawPod, an informed take on current events brought to you by the students and staff at Queen's University Belfast. The show was produced by me, Jay Burbank, Erin Colquhoun, Douglas Goh, Shock Yan Lee. The theme tune was produced by Colonel Chocolate and the Justice Triangle. LawPod is funded by Queen's Law School and the Queen's Annual Fund. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at QUB LawPod. You can also find us on iTunes and anywhere else you get your podcasts. I'm Jay Burbank, and this has been LawPod.